Okay, welcome back to Virtual School Assembly. Today our guest is Geoff Lewis. Geoff is the Assistant Director of Employer Relations, Career and Professional Development at Southern Utah University. He's lived in China and Japan and speaks Chinese and holds degrees from Brandman and Stanford universities. He's also a TEDx speaker and is currently the TEDxSUU organizer. Geoff, I mentioned this before we hopped on, but Geoff is actually a friend of mine, which is so nice because I haven't known a lot of guests this year. And you might notice I'm wearing my little Chinese shirt today. We've kind of bonded over the Asian culture. My brother lived in China, and I'm just so excited, Geoff, that you have this time to be with us today. I know a little bit about your message because I heard your TED Talk, but thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. It's great to get some time with friends during this time of so much separation. I appreciate the nod to Chinese culture there. I'm repping Hawaiian culture. I actually lived in Hawaii for 7 years as well, so aloha.
Aloha. Well, let me hand you the virtual microphone and you can go ahead and the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you mentioned the TED Talk. So I spoke at TEDxSUU back in November 2019 and was an amazing experience. So I want to share just a little bit about how that came to be, what the message was, and then kind of my thoughts currently. So it really focused around anxiety and depression, which has been a struggle for me. We have a family history of it. Some things I went through in the military contributed to that. And I went for years just thinking, well, this is normal. When I was a teenager, you know, I got depressed, but I thought this is normal teenage angst and just kind of dealt with it as best as I could. But once I started getting help, really got a lot of insights that I wanted to share with others. And when I learned about TEDxSUU is actually from my daughter, who was a student here at the time, and she said, "Hey, Dad, you know, you've always wanted to share your experiences. Here's a great opportunity." And it felt like that's a lot of work. It's kind of overwhelming. I don't know if I really want to invest in it, but with her encouragement, not only did I apply and get accepted as a speaker, but I quickly found out the student who was running it was a one-man show. He'd had some people commit and drop out on him. So I was able to jump in and help with the organizing of that one and continuing on with this year's. So the thrust of the talk was stop, breathe, and design. So that's kind of a mantra that I repeated over and over. And the reason I came up with that is I've heard for years the analogy that you should just try to find joy in the journey. And that may be an analogy that works really great for some people. Different analogies speak to different people. That always rubbed me the wrong way, because if I'm driving from here to Las Vegas, for example, like all that's on my mind is Vegas, 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 nice mountain, pretty cloud, are we there yet? And so that analogy just didn't really speak to me. But as a designer, I'm involved in all kinds of things, including photography, art, and graphic design. The analogy of I drew a line wrong, right? I don't feel bad about that. I'm like, oh, oops, I can undo. If it's on the computer, I can erase it, or I can change it into something else. And there's a new possibility that's been created. And so as a design progresses from rough idea to finished product, there's, for me, a beauty and a joy and a satisfaction in exploring, oh, that's interesting. That's not the way I expected. Or, wow, that was definitely not the right result, and let's change it. But never do I feel during that design process that I've ruined things, that it's beyond saving or anything like that. Whereas if I'm driving, you know, again, if I'm going to Vegas and I turn left in St. George, well, now I'm on the wrong road. And, you know, how do I get back? I have one right road. But in design, there is no one right design. I really like the book Designing Your Life, that by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans from Stanford. They talk about how for your life plans, as far as your career and what you do, there is no one right plan. One analogy they use I really like is, what's the best answer to a high-end sports car? Is it a Porsche or a Lamborghini? Well, obviously they're both great cars, but if you look at them, they're both very, very, very different in their design, right? So having the opportunity to share was a wonderful experience. Not only did I get to share kind of how I've grown through the years and been able to reach out and get help and remember that there is no failure until the design is ended, which is when our life naturally ends. But then also able to go and meet some amazing people at the TED Women event down in Southern California, and get the official TEDx training, get involved and get an amazing group of students, a large group of students to lighten the burden for planning this year. So it's been a really interesting journey that kind of served as the impetus for me to start writing a book about this as well, called Stop, Breathe, Design.
Cool.
And then March 2020, everything shut down, including my mood, very much so. So, we started working from home. My wife is from China, and so we knew the news, like we'd been following for months in advance, that this is coming, the virus is gonna get here. And we had friends who do supply chain from China with masks, personal protective equipment. And we were very cognizant that this is gonna come and it's gonna be serious and things are gonna shut down. So we, rather than a lot of people being surprised of, wow, why are we shutting down? Like, we were going, why are we not shutting down yet? And working suddenly from home during a pandemic and being cut off from outside contacts except my family was really hard. And I, in some ways, made the conscious decision that I can't handle writing the book for now. It's got to go on the back burner because I need to spend time with my kids. They need my time because they've been cut off with their friends as much as I need that time with my family. And kind of giving myself permission to say, I don't have to keep up with my weekly, word goal of writing this many words a week and checking in with my mentor. Shout out to Trillian Smalls, thank you. And it, just to give myself that permission and allow myself to not push. And I think we're really, really bad as human beings at doing that, at having compassion for ourselves. So if we were working on a team and, you've got responsibilities, I've got responsibilities, and your kid is sick, right? I'm not gonna call you up and say, Tyler, come on, I need that by noon tomorrow. Like, where is it? Because I know your son is sick. I'm gonna say, wow, are you okay? Is there anything I can do for you? Can I bring some soup over? Like, I'm going to have compassion for you. But when we turn it around and we're looking in the mirror, we go, come on, Geoff, why are you not doing this? You need to live up for this. Why are you not good enough? And learning, it's been a long journey for me. I'm in my 4th decade of life now, and I'm learning to love myself and have that compassion. So to that journey, I first noticed that I had a problem with depression around 2007-ish. And that was the first time I'd gone in and talked to a professional about it. I've been to doctors. I had a problem with sleep. I have sleep apnea, which if you don't sleep well, you have mood problems. I mean, you look at a 5-year-old who hasn't had his nap and they are kind of cranky. And I finally started thinking, maybe there's something more than just having sleep issues. It's why I'm feeling down and groggy and depressed. And through therapy, I've really been able to find a lot of tools that are amazing, but I've never gotten to a point where I feel like, okay, I'm good. I'm a complete person now, and I never need to move on. Now, to that term complete, we are all whole and complete and as perfect as we possibly can be right now, but I'm going to continue growing. Just as a tree, you plant it as a sapling and it's beautiful and it's perfect. Baby Groot is just as valuable as grown-up Groot, right? But in a very different stage of life, right? And teenage Groot is hilarious, but he contributed a lot, right? So I admit, but hopefully the kids like the reference. So for me, most recently, I was introduced to guided meditation with visual imagery. And that, again, since I'm a designer and an artist, that really speaks to me. The specific one that I really liked just a couple weeks back was about being a mountain. So, you breathe deeply, you relax in the chair, you close your eyes, and then the guided meditation is, imagine yourself as a mountain. You're strong, you're tall, the weather comes by, whether it's a sunny day, a snowy day, a rainy day, or a hurricane, you are still there, you are present. Now, I have to acknowledge for the scientists in the room, in terms of deep time, the mountain is also impermanent. I realize that. And we as humans are not permanent, but over our lifetime, the weather is the moods or the things that happen to us. That doesn't change our soul. That doesn't change our core and who we are. And just realizing that I can let negative thoughts go by. There's a pandemic. People are being murdered. We have crazy political stuff going on. That doesn't change who I am, and it definitely doesn't diminish my value. And what I found most interesting that came out of that was not just the mountain metaphor, but I had a vision or an impression as I'm imagining these things of the Hoover Dam. And I'm going to go on a quick tangent and then come back to the dam analogy. When my first son was born, I was living in Monterey, California. I was a student at the Defense Language Institute learning Mandarin Chinese. And our son was born prematurely. So my wife at the time was still in ICU. The kid was in neonatal intensive care. And after 2 days with no sleep, I finally said, I love you all. I gotta drive home and get a good sleep. I'm not sleeping with all the beeping and things going on. And I'll be more valuable to you later if I get a nap. So I drove home, took a nap, was coming back, driving south up the hill. And sorry, I'm gonna get emotional here. So driving up the hill just around sunset, it's just starting to get dark, and an ambulance zooms past. And I can see the lights on in the back of the ambulance, and they're doing CPR, they're doing chest compressions on someone in the back. And I just lost it. I totally broke down, tears gushing down. And that was the first time I realized of how strong the emotional wall was that I had built and put up so that I didn't have to let things in. You know, already struggling, as I mentioned, with anxiety and depression, not really recognizing that yet. If anything really emotional touched me, I don't read much poetry for the same reason. You know, it breaks through kind of that wall or that shell. And that was the first time kind of those floodgates open. So as I was doing this guided meditation about the mountain, I had this vision of the Hoover Dam and what a catastrophe it would be if I let that pressure build up to the point where the dam breaks and the destruction that would happen downstream, as opposed to a controlled flow, you know, doing meditation, taking the time to be in touch with myself and my emotions, talking with other people, whether that's a therapist, an ecclesiastical leader, a friend, my wife, whoever it might be, and having that emotional release and being okay with myself. And then over time, even having the potential to decrease the size of that dam to where we get the flow back in the Gulf of California to, look this up if you're not familiar, what used to be the largest wetlands in all of Northern California. It was absolutely amazing, lush green paradise until we dammed up the Colorado River. So that's a political issue, but in your own life, don't be the dam, right? Find ways to let that emotion out in controlled flows to the point where you become comfortable with the fact that you are not always going to be in control. And if you try to wall things up forever, there will come a point where it's going to release either in a burst of anger or self-harm or, heaven forbid, suicidal attempts.
Yeah, so Geoff, if I can ask you a little bit about this dam analogy or metaphor. When you talk about having a controlled flow, I'm just thinking of the Hoover Dam. I went there when I was a child and haven't been back in a long time. So I don't know if it's still like this, but the controlled flow there was still a ton of water going through. I mean, it was a serious flow, but it was controlled, and they were on top of things. In our lives, we often have to let a lot of things get through. The control part is hard. And you mentioned meditation as one strategy for dealing with anxiety and depression. But what are some other things that have helped you to have that control in your life, so that that's not building up and you're letting everything through at one time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll go back to the stop, breathe, and design and explain a little more about that. So in any situation, we have a stimulus and a response, right? And we can either just respond reflexively, with my kids who are ages 7 and 3, they fight all the time. They love each other, but they still fight. If brother takes sister's toy, immediately the reaction is, ah, yeah, big scream, right? So stimulus response without pausing to choose that response. And of course, as a parent, I'm trying to train them to okay, when someone takes something you don't like, you can talk to them and say, hey, that makes me really unhappy. Please give it back. I know a 3-year-old's not going to get there, but that's the training process, right?
Right.
In a similar way, we have to train our brains to, okay, somebody just said something that offends me, and just immediately reacting, right? Whether that's correcting someone for being wrong on the internet, or getting mad at your teacher in class, or your spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever it might be, instead of just immediately reacting, giving yourself permission and training your brain to recognize that you have a space of a millisecond, a second, 10 seconds, however long you make that space, you have space to choose your response. So that's the first thing, is stop and recognize something happened, I can do something about it. Okay, so second is to breathe. Taking a deep breath puts oxygen into your lungs, your bloodstream, your brain. You think better when your brain has food. Physical nutrition is important, and oxygen is a part of that. So breathing calms your body, gives you a chance to slow your heartbeat down to get more oxygen to your brain, and you can think better, right? And that gives you, again, an even longer pause to decide what you're going to do next. And then the third component is design, is to say, okay, what can I do here? So, for example, let's say your significant other just dumped you, right? That's pretty terrible, right? So you can say, well, my life is over and I have to go shoot myself now. Like, that's an extreme response, but we feel that way because hopefully loving relationships, we do feel that close that if someone's taken away from us, it's heartbreaking, right? But if you stop and say, okay, I'm going to breathe. What can I do now? Well, maybe the first thing you need to do is just give yourself a minute to cry and have that emotional release. Go find a friend to talk to, meditate, pray, go on a hike, look at something beautiful, watch a silly show on Netflix or a comedy on YouTube, watch Virtual School Assembly, but choose something. Realize that you have a choice. You don't have to just go with what your brain told you is the first impulse. And it's really important, and I've learned that our brain generates thoughts. That's what it does constantly. It may be that bubblegum commercial jingle from 5 years ago that just randomly pops up. It's really annoying. Like, you were not intentionally saying, I want a bubblegum jingle right now. So if you can recognize that, you can also recognize that your brain telling you, wow, my life is over, is also just a thought that your brain generated. It's not true, and it's not who you are. If you stop and breathe and realize you have the ability to design by asking for help, taking a hike, watching a funny show, playing a sport, whatever it may be, you have choices in every single moment of what to do.
Yeah. I really like this strategy because so your TED Talk goes through the three things, and you use a lot of examples. You show some of your own design and stuff. And I've thought about that many times since, because this isn't just helpful for dealing with anxiety and depression, but this is a good way to live life. If we can learn to slow down and pause and think about something and be a little more intentional, then we're going to be more productive. We're going to be happier. We're going to find the joy in the journey. As much as you hate that metaphor, that's how we get it, is by stopping and breathing and then designing. And so I really love that idea. Now, you mentioned breathing. We just posted on, and so I want to just put a quick plug in here. On Virtual School Assembly, we did a bunch of teacher professional development over the summer. So even though students, you're watching this, if your teachers are watching, great. There are some old episodes from the summer. There's one by Christopher Willard. He's a professor at Harvard, and he talks about mindfulness, and he goes through some breathing exercises, and they're fantastic. So after you watch this, go back and watch that one, because that's a really great episode. Now, Geoff, I wanted to talk about something you touched on earlier. Another strategy for dealing with anxiety and depression is actually getting help. And that's something that most people actually don't do. Most people don't reach out to others. They keep it built up inside until it explodes and something dramatic happens. I know that was probably a hard decision for you, because around the same time, I went to a therapist for the first time, and just getting there was the hardest thing. And was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. What got you into a position where you could go actually talk to someone and seek that out?
Yeah, great question. for me, it was really having kind of things getting to a crisis level, which again, if you're watching this, don't let them get to crisis level. Recognize we all need help, right? But for me, it was that things had gotten to a point where I just felt my life wasn't manageable. I was constantly angry and irritated at kids, like to the point of there's one evening where my oldest son was probably 7 or 8 at the time, and I was going to wash the dishes. They piled up because when you live in a house with people who eat food, dishes pile up. But I'd been so busy with so many other things and stressed out about work and everything going on that I kind of let them pile up. And it was at a point where I couldn't even turn on the sink because there are too many dishes right under the faucet. And I kind of just exploded and I shoved the dishes off and they landed on the floor and shattered. And my son started crying and said, "You're a monster." And that's pretty harsh, right? And again, I'm sharing this because I hope you don't let your life get to the point where people have to call you a monster and you are seriously damaging other lives to go and get help. The biggest reason, I'll say the biggest reason I didn't go earlier is because in all of society, in all of human society, but particularly from a Western standpoint, we have not understood as a culture that the brain is as much physical as the rest of the body is, right? And so we all get colds, we all get the flu. Hopefully most of us will not get COVID-19, but our bodies are susceptible to illness and disease, right? Our brain is also a physical thing and it gets sick from time to time. Most recently, I was listening to Michelle Obama's podcast, and that's what actually got me back into saying, hey, I want to do virtual school assembly, and I want to start writing my book again, because she mentioned that she's suffering from low-grade depression during this time. And I thought, holy cow, if someone who went through all that abuse and attacks leading up to the election, the whole time she was in the White House, called every possible horrible thing, if she's depressed now, because of what's going on with COVID-19, with Black Lives Matter, with the political craziness, and she can admit that and give permission to me and to other people that, hey, A, this is okay to talk about, B, this is totally 100% normal, then I need to get back to sharing my experience as well. So again, getting to a point of crisis was what brought me to initially seek out help for mental health. And not admitting that my brain is a physical part of my body was what prevented me from going sooner.
Yeah, that's really great. I love that you mentioned that this is normal. I think a lot of kids especially don't realize that, especially as kids, as teenagers, you're going to have a lot of really high highs and a lot of really low lows. Now, part of that's hormones, part of that's life. But when I was a kid, there were even small things like I didn't know other kids would get sweaty armpits. And I was so embarrassed. I'd wear like 5 shirts so I could sweat through all of them, because I was like, I'm so embarrassed that I have sweaty armpits. And I didn't know like that happened to other kids too, And I think it's really important to recognize that that is normal. It's okay to get help. And even if you're not in a position yet to get help, there are resources like you mentioned, Geoff. There are podcasts, there are books out there, there are programs that you can watch. And so there are things you can do immediately, even if you feel like you're not to crisis point yet. So I love that. Before we wrap up, I have one more thing I want to talk about. You mentioned earlier that you're writing a book, you do photography. You're just a very creative person between learning languages. I know you're also a musician. And so being creative, how does that tie in to dealing with difficult things in your life? Does it have a role? And if so, what kind of role does that play?
Yeah, it has a huge role. And first, I would say, I want to address the term creative, because we have a misconception about that as well. We think that someone who's artistic or musical is creative, and somebody who is good at construction or fixing cars or playing soccer or hiking is not creative. But everything that we do every day creates, right? It's like ripples in a pond. It creates an effect that grows internally and externally. Whatever we do is creating each moment. So having a hobby having something you can do other than your responsibilities, whether that's chores at home, whether that's a job, whether that's schoolwork. You need to have something that builds you up as a person. That I love the term recreation, right? Because it's recreating yourself. And so whether that's hiking a mountain, bicycling, joining a choir, getting involved in a school play, joining the soccer team, whatever it may be, that refills your well, right? The analogy, you can't draw water from an empty well. I also love the analogy, if you're on an airplane, when the oxygen drops, when the oxygen mask comes down, you put on your mask first before you help anybody else. And we make a big mistake, and I definitely did as a teenager, of trying to help other people before helping myself. Now, that's not to say we want to be selfish and, oh, well, I need to be rich and famous before I can help anybody. That's not what I'm saying. But a minimum level of self-care, need to eat right, get good sleep, and then take care of my emotional, spiritual, physical needs, or I'm going to burn out trying to help other people.
Right. Cool. Well, Geoff, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate you coming on. It's fun to catch up. It's funny because we live like 3 blocks apart, but I haven't seen you since March, so it's good to see you again. If kids want to know more about you or connect on social or something like that, where's the best place to find you online?
Yeah, so the 2 places would be LinkedIn. You can look me up on there. I know there'll be a link that's just description. And then Fried Paint is my handle on Instagram and my website. So that's where I share my photography and design stuff.
Cool. We'll link those all up. Thanks for being on again today, Geoff. It's been great talking with you.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.